carries. Order. Orders of the day, daily routine, presenting and reading petitions. The Honourable Member for Victoria the Lakes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I beg leave to introduce a petition, the operative clause being, we the concerned citizens of Neils Harbour, New Haven, White Point, Smeltbrook and South Harbour request the Minister to consider our petition regarding the deplorable condition of the roads in these areas and that repairs and upgrading be carried out as soon as possible. The petition contains the signatures of 680 individuals, and I have affixed my signature as well.
The petition is tabled. Presenting reports of committees. Tabling reports, regulations, and other papers. The Honourable Minister of Justice.
Mr. Speaker, I'd like to table a report tabling changes to the civil procedures rules.
The report is tabled. Statements by ministers. Government notices of motion. The Honourable Minister of Economic and Rural Development and Tourism.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas the White Point Beach Resort, which began as a hunting and fishing lodge in 1928, has attracted individuals, families, and corporations from all parts of the world to the beauty and serenity of Nova Scotia's South Shore, and their annual visits eventually woven into the fabric of their families, of their corporate histories, and whereas the White Point Lodge was tragically destroyed by fire on Saturday, November the 12th, and whereas the staff, management, and owners of White Point show nothing but professionalism, their usually exemplary attention to customer service ethic, and are looking forward today with optimism to rebuilding this icon in our South Shore community. Therefore, be it resolved that all members of the House of Assembly acknowledge the entrepreneurial spirit, the hard-working drive to recreate the world-renowned experience of a White Point stay, in which the staff, management, and owners of White Point and all community members the very best as they work toward a strong and positive future for their resort. Mr. Speaker, I ask for a waiver without notice. I ask for waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? Agreed. All those in favour say aye. Aye. All those against say nay. Motion is carried. The Honourable Minister of Education.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas Saba Balvardi moved to Nova Scotia with her family from Iran in 2008 with a limited understanding of English, and whereas while attending Halifax West High School enrolled in the International Baccalaureate program, and whereas with the support of her teachers, family, and her own dedication to education, Saba scored a 45 out of a possible 45 on her exams, the highest mark a Nova Scotian student has received. And Saba is the only public school student to reach this impressive standard. Therefore, be it resolved that the members of the House of Assembly congratulate Saba on her accomplishment and wish her the best of luck as she is attending McGill University on a full scholarship. Mr. Speaker, I ask for waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? Agreed. All those in favour say aye. Aye. All those against say nay. Motion is carried. The Honourable Minister of Natural Resources.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I hereby give notice on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas for the past 40 years, since 1971, Nova Scotia has been sending a Christmas tree to Boston as a gift and appreciation for help given following the Halifax explosion. And whereas Ken and Donna Spinney of Central Argyll in Yarmouth County have agreed to provide a lovely 48-year-old white spruce for this worthwhile venture, and whereas several government departments, agencies, and private contractors have cooperated to prepare, harvest, and ship this year's tree, which will be cut tomorrow, November the 15th. Therefore, be it resolved that members of this House acknowledge the generosity of the Christmas tree donors and the efforts of those involved in a project that expresses our gratitude to our Boston neighbours. And Mr. Speaker, I ask for a waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? All those in favour say aye. All those against say nay. Motion is carried. The Honourable Minister of Finance.
Mr. Speaker, on behalf of the Minister of Health and Wellness, I hereby give notice that on a future day, I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas November is Diabetes Awareness Month and November 14th is World Diabetes Day, and whereas more than 9 million Canadians live with diabetes or pre-diabetes, and here at home, diabetes affects more than 75,000 adult Nova Scotians and 750 children. And whereas there are many organizations, such as the Canadian Diabetes Association, who are leading the fight against diabetes by helping people with diabetes live healthy lives while working to find a cure. Therefore, be it resolved that all members of this House of Assembly join me in marking Diabetes Awareness Month, show leadership by modeling healthy lifestyle practices, and support the organizations like the Canadian Diabetes Association that support Nova Scotians with diabetes. Mr. Speaker, I ask for a waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? All those in favour say aye. All those against say nay. Motion is carried. The Honourable Minister of Health and Wellness.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I hereby give notice that on a future day, I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas November is Addictions Awareness Month at Capital Health, and whereas this year's theme, 4 Weeks of Awareness and Hope, will share information and resources about addiction to raise awareness of addiction throughout the district by asking all citizens to play their part in living in a healthier community. And whereas 4 weeks of awareness and hope serves as a reminder that addiction treatment is a healthcare service like any other, and addiction stigma must end so that all people feel safe in seeking the help they need. Therefore, be it resolved that all members of this House of Assembly join me in marking Addictions Awareness Month and show leadership by encouraging all Nova Scotians to support men and women who are living with addiction. And Mr. Speaker, I ask for waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? All those in favour say aye. All those against say nay. Motion is carried. Introduction of bills. The Honourable Leader of the Official Opposition.
Mr. Speaker, I beg leave to introduce a bill on behalf of my colleague from Halifax Clayton Park, entitled An Act to Provide for the Establishment of the Entrepreneur Stream under the Nova Scotia Nominee Program.
The Honourable Member for Halifax Clayton Park begs leave to introduce a bill entitled An Act to Provide for the Establishment of an Entrepreneur Stream under the Nova Scotia Nominee Program.
Bill number 91, entitled An Act to Provide for the Establishment of an Entrepreneur Stream under the Nova Scotia Nominee Program.
Order the bill be read a second time on a future day. The Honourable Leader of the Progressive Conservative Party.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I beg leave to introduce on a future day a bill entitled An Act Respecting the Review and Reduction of Power Rates.
The Honourable Leader of the Progressive Conservative Party begs leave to introduce a bill entitled An Act Respecting the Review and Reduction of Power Rates.
Bill number 92, entitled An Act Respecting the Review and Reduction of Power Rates.
Order the bill be read a second time on a future day. I will now recognize the Honourable Minister of Education.
Mr. Speaker, I beg leave to introduce a bill entitled An Act to Amend Chapter 1 of the Acts of the 1995-96, the Education Act, respecting teachers.
The Honourable Minister of Education begs leave to introduce a bill entitled An Act to Amend Chapter 1 of the Acts of 1995-96, the Education Act, respecting teachers.
Bill number 93, entitled An Act to Amend Chapter 1 of the Acts of 1995-96, the Education Act, respecting teachers.
The Honourable Minister of Education.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I beg leave to introduce a bill entitled An Act to Amend Chapter 194 of the Revised Statutes 1989, the Atlantic Provinces Special Education Authority Act.
The Honourable Minister of Education begs leave to introduce a bill entitled An Act to Amend Chapter 194 of the Revised Statute 1989, the Atlantic Provinces Special Education Authority Act.
Bill number 94, entitled An Act to Amend Chapter 194 of the Revised Statutes 1989, the Atlantic Provinces Special Education Authority Act.
Order the bill be read a second time on a future day. I will now recognize the Honourable Minister of Education.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I beg leave to introduce a bill entitled An Act to Amend Chapter 1 of the Acts of 1995-96, the Education Act, respecting school boards.
The Honourable Minister of Education begs leave to introduce a bill entitled An Act to Amend Chapter 1 of the Acts of 1995-96, the Education Act, respecting school boards.
Bill number 95, entitled An Act to Amend Chapter 1 of the Acts of 1995-96, the Education Act, respecting school boards.
Order the bill read a second time on a future day. Notices of motion. The Honourable Member for Lunenburg West.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And I will be reading this resolution on behalf of the member for Queens. I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas on Saturday, November 12th, the main lodge building at White Point Beach Resort was consumed by fire, and whereas the dedicated management and staff continued amid the myriad of activities related to fighting the fire to care for and give primary attention to their valued guests, including accommodating a wedding ceremony on the beach of the resort, and whereas the members from volunteer fire stations all along the South Shore, including Bridgewater, Lunenburg, Mahone Bay, Shelburne, Lockport, New Germany, Italy Cross, United Communities, Port Midway, Mill Village, Charleston, Greenfield, Oak Hill, Hempford, Sable River, Barrington and Island, Barrington Passage, Port Clyde, Port Latour, Woods Harbor, North Queens, and Liverpool either worked directly with extreme courage and skill or were called upon to stand by to protect other communities whose departments had responded. Therefore, be it resolved that all members of the House of Assembly acknowledge the spirit, courage, and perseverance demonstrated by White Point Beach Resort management and staff, and all hardworking firefighters on the South Shore in fighting the White Point Beach Lodge fire. Mr. Speaker, I ask for a waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? All those in favor say aye. All those against say nay. Motion is carried. The Honourable Member for Bedford Birch Cove.
Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas November 11th, 2011 marked the first year the community of Hammonds Plains held its own ceremony to commemorate Remembrance Day, and whereas the ceremony was complete with prayers of remembrance, a lament, a bugler, laying of wreaths, and had participation from local air cadets, scouts, guides, and World War II reenactors. And whereas, despite driving rain, the community of Hammonds Plains came out in strong numbers to the local fire hall to commemorate our veterans past and present, who sacrificed to protect our freedoms. Therefore, be it resolved that the members of this House of Assembly commend the ceremony organizers, including Jim Miller, the Group Commissioner of the 1st Hammonds Plains Scouts, for their efforts in ensuring we continue to remember the significant contributions that veterans made to our society through their sacrifices. Mr. Speaker, I ask for waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? All those in favor say aye. All those against say nay. Motion is carried. The Honourable Leader of the Progressive Conservative Party.
Thank you. Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas after a multifaceted campaign that featured celebrities and politicians, Nova Scotians learned that the Bay of Fundy was not successful in becoming a finalist in the new Wonders of Nature competition. Whereas because of the 4-year campaign, the Bay of Fundy achieved top 28 status in the competition, and people around the world now know about the Bay's incredible tides, diverse ecosystem, and plentiful marine life. And whereas the campaign was spearheaded by Terry McCullough of the Bay of Fundy Tourism Partnership and her countless volunteers, and supported by thousands of Nova Scotians who voted for the Bay of Fundy and helped spread the word. Therefore, be it resolved that all members of this House thank Terry McCullough and everyone who helped to make the Bay of Fundy campaign such a success, and declare that the Bay of Fundy is a natural wonder that all Nova Scotians can be proud of. Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? All those in favor say aye. All those against say nay. Motion is carried. The Honourable Member for Kings West.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas November 13th to the 19th is National Addictions Awareness Week, and whereas National Addictions Awareness Week was established in 1987 to create a better understanding among Canadians and Nova Scotians alike of substance abuse. Whereas this week offers individuals and communities the opportunity to work together to raise awareness around the social and health challenges associated with addictions related to alcohol, drugs, prescription drugs, gambling, and tobacco. Therefore, be it resolved that all members of the Legislature acknowledge November 13th to the 19th as National Addictions Awareness Week, and be ever mindful of the needs of a variety of programs and supports to deal with all types of addictions in our province. Mr. Speaker, I ask for waiver of notice, passage without debate.
There has been a request for waivers. Is it agreed? All those in favor say aye. All those against say nay. Motion is carried. The Honourable Member for Victoria the Lakes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas the Honourable Peter MacKay, Minister of National Defence, took part in the celebration of the 140th anniversary of the Cape Breton Highlanders by presenting the members with their camp flag in Bedeck on October 2nd, and whereas the Cape Breton Highlanders have a history of strong ties with the people in Cape Breton, so it was fitting to mark this anniversary with the restored name of the Cape Breton Highlanders. And whereas camp flags were used to aid soldiers in finding their unit on the field of battle, and the flag is now flown in Bedeck to identify the organization and the birthplace of the unit. Therefore, be it resolved that all members of this House of Assembly congratulate members and families of the Cape Breton Highlanders on their 140th anniversary and thank them for their brave contributions to Nova Scotia and to Canada. Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice and passage without debate.
Good one. There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? All those in favor say aye. All those against say nay. Motion is carried. The Honourable Member for Dartmouth East.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas the Dartmouth Heritage Museum began as a group of local citizens who wanted to celebrate their shared heritage, and whereas the Dartmouth Heritage Museum has persevered and flourished over these past years thanks to the dedication of countless volunteers and staff, and whereas the museum continues to collaborate and deliver quality interpretation and educational programming to the community, therefore be it resolved that members of the House of Assembly join me in congratulating the Dartmouth Heritage Museum on their 50th anniversary and recognize the efforts of all museum volunteers past and present. And Mr. Speaker, I ask for waiver of notice and passage without debate. Sorry.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? All those in favor say aye. All those against say nay. Motion is carried. The honourable member for Inverness.
Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas Jamie White, senior girls basketball coach at Inverness Academy High School, announced his retirement this year. And whereas Mr. White, a high school teacher, husband and father of 4, who dedicated 15 years of service to his school, athletes, and the sport of basketball, was presented with a framed team jersey in appreciation for his work. And whereas Mr. White's time and dedication to extracurricular sports has earned him the respect of his students, his peers, and his community. Therefore, be it resolved that all members of this House of Assembly congratulate Jamie White on his retirement, commend him for his volunteerism, and wish him luck with all future endeavours. Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? All those in favour say aye. All those against say nay. Motion is carried. The honourable member for Colchester North.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I hereby give notice on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas the Heritage Fair project of 11-year-old Noah Tremblay of Bass River, Colchester North, entitled Forgotten Heroes, dealt with animals who served and sometimes gave their lives for their country. And whereas Noah's project won the Veterans Award and the Students Award, and whereas Noah decided to use his project to raise money, now over $8,000, and may I say some of that came from the Department of Communities, Culture and Heritage. I want to thank the Minister for that. For a monument in the Veterans Memorial Park in Bass River. Therefore, be it resolved that Noah Tremblay be congratulated for the creative idea to erect this monument and for his unending work to make this become a reality. Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice, passage without debate.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? All those in favour say aye. All those against say nay. Motion is carried. The honourable member for Cape Breton North.
Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas the Bartown Community Society produced a historical reenactment to honour the Cape Breton Highlanders and the Royal Newfoundland Regiment, with a script written by Ken Chisholm and directed by Jonathan Collins. And whereas this play was called Onward to Valour and was presented October 22nd, and whereas a host of volunteers spent countless hours bringing this play to the stage to commemorate the historical achievements of the brave men and women who served these distinguished regiments. Therefore, be it resolved that all members of this House of Assembly congratulate all those who had a hand in the production of Onward to Valour and thank them for honouring local heroes. Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? All those in favour say aye. All those against say nay. Motion is carried. The honourable member for Clare.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas 2011 marks the 20th anniversary for Jackie's Youth Clothing in Saint Bernard, and whereas throughout the years, Jackie, Marilyn, along with their staff, have provided outstanding service to their customers, and whereas Jackie's Youth Clothing has made a significant contribution to the economy of Clare, therefore be resolved that all members of this House of Assembly join me in congratulating Jackie, Marilyn, and staff on their 20th anniversary and wish them continued success in future endeavours. Mr. Speaker, I would ask for waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? All those in favour say aye. All those against say nay. Motion is carried. The Honourable Leader of the Progressive Conservative Party.
Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas today marks the beginning of Bullying Awareness Week, a time when children and adults all over Canada band together to educate and bring attention to an issue that affects too many Nova Scotians. And whereas Stand Up, Be a Friend is a theme for this year's campaign, which encourages Canadians to refrain from being bystanders to bullying. And whereas Bullying Awareness Week not only emphasizes the need for all Canadians to play an active role to stop bullying, but it also focuses on those who make significant contributions to the cause and on the leadership potential of our youth. Therefore, be it resolved that all members of this House recognize that bullying is not acceptable in our society, while pledging our support to raising awareness about this issue, and sincerely thank the people in our communities who have made such contributions to the cause already. Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? All those in favour say aye. All those against say nay. Motion is carried. The Honourable Member for Yarmouth.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas during the weekend of October 28th to 30th, the 4th annual Chicks with Sticks female hockey tournament took place in Yarmouth. And whereas Red Cap Restaurant female Bantam A Mariners consisting of Lindsay Menard, Ariel Doucette, Kaylee D'Entremont, Shayna Haru, Janelle Sibley, Angèle LeBlanc, Alyssa Sibley, Erica Gaudette, Olivia Airy, Anik Dugas, Josenne DeVoe, Morgan Theriault, Laura Legier, Melissa Atkinson, and Kristen D'Entremont under the guidance of Coach Daniel Gaudette and assistant coaches Norman Gaudette and April Bonia competed in this tournament. And whereas the Red Cap Restaurant female Bantam A Mariners won the gold medal during the Chicks with Sticks tournament by defeating Eastern Shore by a score of 3-2 in the championship game, therefore be resolved that the members of this House of Assembly congratulate the Red Cap Restaurant female Bantam A Mariners on their gold medal performance, wish them much future success, and thank them for their contributions to sports in Yarmouth. Mr. Speaker, I ask for waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? All those in favor say aye. All those against say nay. Motion is carried. The honourable member for Victoria the Lakes.
Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas the Cabot Trail Food Market, under the capable direction and ownership of Miles and Jacqueline Dixon, is the largest independent grocery store in the Cape North area of Cape Breton Island. And whereas the Cabot Trail Food Market offers anything anyone would want if they were simply going grocery shopping or even planning for a camping trip. And whereas in addition to groceries and camping supplies, the Cabot Trail Food Market also offers a food takeout service along with fresh deli meats and produce. Therefore, be it resolved that all members of this House of Assembly recognize the importance of the Cabot Trail Food Market to the Cape North and surrounding area and wish Miles and Jacqueline Dixon continued business success. Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? All those in favor say aye. All those against say nay. Motion is carried. The honourable member for Yarmouth, Digby, Annapolis. Sorry.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas on Monday, June 20th, former Mayor of Digby, Frank McIntosh, was presented with the Joe Casey Humanitarian Award. And whereas this award is intended for someone who, like Joe Casey, had dedicated themselves to Digby. And whereas Frank McIntosh served the town of Digby as a town cop, hospital employee, chair of Scallop Days, and served on council for 20 years as mayor for Digby. Therefore, be it resolved that all members of the House of Assembly congratulate Frank McIntosh on these accomplishments and as the recipient of the first Joe Casey Humanitarian Award. Mr. Speaker, I ask for waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? All those in favor say aye. All those against say nay. Motion is carried. The honourable member for Inverness.
Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice that on a future date I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas this year marks the 75th anniversary of Cape Breton Highlands National Park, one of the most visited regions in Canada. And whereas at a recent celebration, members of surrounding communities joined with staff and volunteers to celebrate this significant milestone. And whereas since 1936, the park has protected the majestic highlands and coastal wilderness stretching across the northern tip of Cape Breton Island. Therefore, be it resolved that all members of this House of Assembly acknowledge the efforts of Field Unit Superintendent Chip Bird and all staff at the Cape Breton Highlands National Park for keeping this treasure in shining form. Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? All those in favor say aye. All those against say nay. Motion is carried. The honourable member for Kings West.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas the United Nations Declaration passed in 2006 declared today, November 14th, as World Diabetes Day, and therefore the date is significant as it marks the birthday of the world-renowned Canadian medical scientist and physician Sir Frederick Banting, who along with Dr. Charles Best is credited with the discovery of insulin. And whereas November 14th brings together millions of people in 160 countries to raise awareness of diabetes and unites organizations to reinforce the need for diabetes awareness here in Nova Scotia and throughout our country. Therefore, be it resolved that all members of the legislature acknowledge November 14 as World Diabetes Day and extend our appreciation to organizations such as the Canadian Diabetes Association of Nova Scotia Division and the Juvenile Diabetes Research Foundation Atlantic Region for the individual and collective roles they play in raising diabetes awareness here in Nova Scotia. Mr. Speaker, I ask for waiver of notice, passage without debate.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? All those in favour say aye. All those against say nay. Motion is carried. The honourable member for Cape Breton North.
Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice that on a future date I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas the North Sydney Heritage Museum has opened in the Cultural and Heritage Centre on the main street of North Sydney, and whereas the pride and joy of the museum is a 1919 LaFrance fire truck, along with a wide variety of interpretive panels and artifacts. Whereas the museum tells the story of the harbour, the Western Union office, politicians, police and fire departments, families, and the role played by local people in the First and Second World Wars. Therefore, be it resolved that all members of this House of Assembly congratulate all those who played a role in the creation of the new North Sydney Heritage Museum and thank them for keeping the rich history of the area alive for future generations. Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? All those in favour say aye. All those against say nay. Motion is carried. The honourable member for Bedford Birch Cove.
Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas Dartmouth lawyer Emma Halpern opened her home to a homeless teenager and created a student-run program to address conflict in schools called Bringing Restorative Justice into Schools, which has reduced suspension rates by up to 82%. And whereas out of hundreds of women across the country, Emma Halpern has been chosen the winner in the category of Everyday Heroes in Chatelaine Magazine's Women of the Year Awards. And whereas this particular award, presented in partnership with City TV, celebrates Emma Halpern's contributions to the community, the school system, and teenagers struggling with conflict, and recognizes her as one of many remarkable and inspiring women making positive change at home and abroad. Therefore, be it resolved that the members of this House of Assembly applaud the accomplishments of Emma Halpern and her recognition by Chatelaine Magazine and congratulate her on her win. Mr. Speaker, I ask for waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? Agreed. All those in favour say aye. All those against say nay. Motion is carried. The honourable member for Halifax Clayton Park.
Thank you. Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas on Sunday, November 6, 2011, the Maritime Egyptian Society celebrated Eid al-Adha at the St. Andrew's Community Centre in Halifax. And whereas this special day is a happy occasion for Muslims around the world as it commemorates the end of the pilgrimage to Mecca in Saudi Arabia, and it includes family and friends and the exchanging of greetings and gifts. Whereas the evening celebration was attended by many families and their guests and included traditional food, speeches, and games for the children. Therefore, be it resolved that the members of the Legislative Assembly congratulate the Maritime Egyptian Society on the occasion of Eid al-Adha and on their success in bringing their growing community together for this cultural and religious celebration. Mr. Speaker, I ask for waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? All those in favour say aye. All those against say nay. Motion is carried. The honourable member for Richmond.
Monsieur le Président, à une date ultérieure, je demanderai l'adoption de la résolution suivante. Attendu que la médaille de la lieutenant-gouverneur est présentée à une fille et un garçon de chaque école secondaire de la Nouvelle-Écosse qui ont fait preuve de leadership et qui ont été au service de leur école et de leur communauté. Attendu que la médaille de la lieutenant-gouverneur est décernée à des élèves qui ont obtenu un rendement exceptionnel dans leur cours. Attendu que Nicole Sanson de l'école Beauport a été choisie comme récipiendaire de la médaille de la lieutenant-gouverneur lors d'une cérémonie qui a eu lieu le 10 juin 2011. Par conséquent, il est résolu que les membres de la Chambre d'Assemblée félicitent Nicole Sanson pour avoir reçu la médaille de la lieutenant-gouverneur et pour avoir été un modèle positif dans son école et sa communauté. Monsieur le Président, je demande l'adoption de cette résolution sans préavis et sans débat. Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas the Lieutenant Governor's Medal is awarded to one boy and one girl in each Nova Scotia high school who has demonstrated qualities of leadership and service in their school and community. And whereas the Lieutenant Governor's Medal is awarded to students who have exceptional performance in the courses in which they are enrolled. And whereas Nicole Sampson was chosen from École Beauport as a recipient of the Lieutenant Governor's Medal at a ceremony which took place on June 10, 2011. Therefore, be it resolved that members of the House of Assembly congratulate Nicole Sampson for receiving the Lieutenant Governor's Medal and commend her for being a positive role model in her school and community. Mr. Speaker, I ask for a waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? All those in favor say aye. All those against say nay. Motion is carried. The honourable member for Clare.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas the environment is becoming an ever more important and serious issue in our province, and whereas every year the RRFB Nova Scotia honours innovative organizations and individuals who have taken a leading role in reducing waste at its mobilious Environmental Awards Gala, and whereas this year the RRFB recognized the work of Karen Timat and the Clare Community Cleanup as the best community-based project, therefore be resolved that all members of this House of Assembly recognize the work of Karen Timat and the Clare Community Cleanup in reducing their waste and helping the environment, and congratulate them on their award as the best community-based project. And Mr. Speaker, I would ask for waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There has been a request for waivers. Is it agreed? All those in favor say aye. All those against say nay. Motion is carried. The honourable member for Colchester North.
Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas Harry Chase became a member of the Truro Fire Department in 1951 and rose to the ranks to become fire chief in 1967, and whereas Harry later became a founding member of the Onslow Belmont Fire Brigade, served as fire chief of the Great Village and District Fire Brigade, and was a member of the Maritime Fire Chiefs, and whereas Harry became a member of the Board of Directors of the Nova Scotia Fire School and served as an instructor training firefighters across the province for 15 years, therefore be it resolved all members of this House of Assembly express their appreciation to Harry Chase for his 55 years of dedication to the fire service of Nova Scotia. Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? All those in favor say aye. All those against say nay. Motion is carried. The honourable member for Dartmouth East.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas Ms. Una Lauder is a champion paddler from Sonobe Aquatic Club on Lake Banook, and whereas the 2011 Pan American Games concluded in Guadalajara, Mexico on October 30th, and whereas Ms. Lauder and her 3 teammates won a gold medal in the Games in the event Women's Kayak K4 500 meters. Therefore, be it resolved that all members of the House of Assembly join me in congratulating Ms. Launder and her teammates on their outstanding athletic achievement. Mr. Speaker, I ask for waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? All those in favor say aye. All those against say nay. Motion is carried. The honourable member for Yarmouth.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas from October 28th to 30th, Yarmouth hosted the Chicks with Sticks female hockey tournament, the province's largest female hockey tournament, and welcomed 24 female hockey teams from across the province, from across Nova Scotia, And whereas this was the 4th annual tournament, which is organized by the Yarmouth County Minor Hockey Association, and is always an exciting and memorable weekend for the Yarmouth community. And whereas the Chicks with Sticks organizing committee, consisting of co-chair Charlotte Menard and Paul McDonald, Sonia Breton, Cheryl Airy, Tish Muse, Karen LeBlanc, Monica LeBlanc, Joanne Kinney, Graham Amiro, Paula Gowdy, Chris Gowdy, Katie Cudmore, as well as many volunteers gave their time and energy in organizing this tournament. Therefore, be it resolved that the members of this House of Assembly congratulate the Yarmouth County Minor Hockey Association and the Chicks with Sticks organizing committee and all the teams who competed in the 4th annual Chicks with Sticks female hockey tournament on a successful weekend of hockey. Mr. Speaker, I ask for waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? All those in favor say aye. All those against say nay. Motion is carried. The honourable member for Digby Annapolis.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas the Bay of Fundy was chosen to compete as one of the new 7 natural wonders of the world and has won world attention because of this. And whereas from this world attention, visitors will increase immensely over the next few years, so we must build the infrastructure to accommodate and grow our tourism sector of this province. And whereas it is another wonder why our ferry services to cross this wonder of the world are not up to capacity to help make this happen. Therefore, be it resolved that this government sees this great opportunity for this potential growth and works hard to put in place adequate ferry services to cross our wonder of the world to accommodate the millions of more people who will come to this province. Mr. Speaker, I ask the waiver of notice passage without debate.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? Agreed. All those in favour say aye. Aye. All those against say nay. Motion is carried. The honourable member for Richmond.
Monsieur le Président, à une date ultérieure, je demanderai l'adoption de la résolution suivante. Attendu que la médaille de la lieutenant-gouverneur est présentée à une fille et un garçon de chaque école secondaire de la Nouvelle-Écosse qui ont fait preuve de leadership et qui ont été au service de leur école et de leur communauté. Attendu que la médaille de lieutenant-gouverneur est décernée à des élèves qui ont obtenu un rendement exceptionnel dans leur cours. Attendu que Tyson Pierce de l'école Beauport a été choisi comme récipiendaire de la médaille de lieutenant-gouverneur lors d'une cérémonie qui a eu lieu le 10 juin 2011. Par conséquent, il est résolu que les membres de la Chambre d'Assemblée félicitent Tyson Pierce pour avoir reçu la médaille de la lieutenant-gouverneur et pour avoir été un modèle positif dans son école et sa communauté. Monsieur le Président, je demande l'adoption de cette résolution sans préavis et sans débat. Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas the Lieutenant Governor's Medal is awarded to one boy and one girl in each Nova Scotia high school who has demonstrated qualities of leadership and service in their school and community. Whereas the Lieutenant Governor's Medal is awarded to students who have exceptional performance in the courses in which they are enrolled. And whereas Tyson Pierce was chosen from École Beauport as the recipient of Lieutenant Governor's Medal at a ceremony which took place on June 10, 2011. Therefore, be it resolved that the members of the House of Assembly congratulate Tyson Pierce for receiving the Lieutenant Governor's Medal and commend him for being a positive role model in his school and community. Mr. Speaker, I ask for waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? Agreed. All those in favour say aye. Aye. All those against say nay. Motion is carried. The honourable member for Pictou East on an introduction.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, we have two well-known Pictou County residents in the gallery, in the East Gallery this evening, and they are Larry Maloney and Mary Lloyd, and I would ask that they stand. They are both involved with the Pictou County Injured Workers. They do a lot of great work in Pictou County and beyond, and I would ask that they stand and receive a very warm welcome from this House.
Thank you. We welcome all our guests to all our visitors and guests to our gallery, and hope they enjoy this evening's proceedings. I will now recognize the Honourable Minister of Economic and Rural Development and Tourism on an introduction.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I too would like to make an introduction tonight in the House. And opposite me in the East Gallery, I'd like to recognize a long-time friend of mine, Lillian Lopi. She's joined with her is Christine Saunier and their three children, Thea Benjamin, Madeline Saunier Gallant, and Gabriel Saunier Gallant. Would you please rise and get a warm welcome from the House?
We welcome all our guests to tonight's proceedings and hope they enjoy the evening. I will now recognize the Honourable Government House Leader.
Mr. Speaker, thank you very much. Mr. Speaker, could you please call government bills, public bills for second reading?
Government public bills for second reading.
You need bigger font on that speech.
Yeah.
Which bill?
The Honourable Government House Leader.
Mr. Speaker, could you please call bill number 84?
Bill number 84. The Honourable Deputy Premier.
Mr. Speaker, on behalf of the Minister of Agriculture, I would like to move that Bill 84, the Animal Protections Act, be now read for a second time. Thank you.
Very good.
The Honourable Member for Kings West.
Well, thank you, Mr. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And the first thing I guess we wanted to say is, in a general sense, that the Animal Protection Act has undergone an enormous change and transformation over the last few years, because it was found wanting in many respects. And this amendment is really, again, continuing that process of updating, making it stronger, making it more relevant. And the amendments here will make animal protection more effective by clarifying the powers and duties of inspectors in cases involving animals in the care of the province or the SPCA. Because when the Animal Protection Act was updated a couple of years ago, one of the main changes that took place was that farm animals would come under the jurisdiction of the Department of Agriculture, whereas pets would come under the SPCA. But as a result of that occurring, not all of there wasn't a full transfer of how that would be administered and managed. So this is where this amendment to the Animal Protection Act picks up here, because the amendments will enable the province to recover costs associated with the seizure and care of farm animals from the owner. And this was, again, an area that was not covered off, and the province would pick up the costs for care. It could be with the sale of an animal. All of these were incurred. It could be to be checked by obviously veterinarian when there was in fact a failure of care by the owner. So this will now enable the province to recover some of those costs associated once the animal is seized. A similar provision currently exists for the SPCA regarding domestic animals. So, as I said, it's a matter of having this bill cover farm animals and to allow the province to recoup some of the costs that they may incur. The amendments will also shorten the time before the department can seize abandoned farm animals. And we know that there are a few really historic cases in the province where it took considerable time and animals continued to suffer as a result of a delay in the seizure of the animal. In other words, in having the legal authority to go onto the farm, do the inspection, and determine, in fact, yes, that these animals were in a state of decline, that they were suffering. And so now this amendment will allow for quick access for this process to be carried out. The province will be able to recover the cost of caring for abused farm animals that it seizes under proposed new legislation, and I reference this. And the changes will allow the province to sell seized animals after a 72-hour waiting period. Because as we know, most farm animals, not all, but most farm animals are being raised for purposes of going to market. And so if the animal is at the point where it can be sold, and it could be, of course, you know, to another farmer, could be at an auction, or it could go to a slaughterhouse, whatever the appropriate situation is. The province would keep enough cash to cover its costs and give the rest to the animal's former owner. So the bill doesn't say that once the animal is seized, there will be no compensation going to the owner. In fact, it states very clearly that they will just recover the cost of the process of seizure and the process of having a veterinarian's bill and care for the animal that may be required, and the remainder of the monies garnered would in fact go back to the farmer. And that's what would happen if a judicial review of the seizure found in the province's favor, because one of the strengths of the Animal Protection Act is that the farmer will in fact have an opportunity to be able to present his case that the animal was seized without really due information on why it was being seized, and perhaps there wasn't a strong enough case if there was considerable, I guess, you know, subjective views as to why the animal needed to be taken from the farm. But if the judicial review went against the province, the former owner would get all the cash or the animals if the decision came before a sale. So, so there is here, I think, a balance in what can happen through this amendment, where the farmer can be compensated, the province can get its fair share of the care needs of the animal. But if the animal is seized by authorities without having, you know, good cause, then the farmer, in fact, is going to get the full value of the animal that he has been raising for some time. I was very surprised, in fact, to find out that the statistic for 2010 was that 100 investigations were actually carried out in the province of Nova Scotia. And that does come as somewhat of a surprise, since I know where I live in rural Nova Scotia, you know, there are animals that are part of the a number of the farm operations. I know many farmers in the valley who do have animals, and knowing the kind of care that they receive, this came as somewhat of a surprise. And this was the first year the province was responsible for complaints about cruelty to farm animals, and but there were only 4 involved the seizure of animals. So while we had 100 cases that were reported, it is in fact good to see that you know, there was good deliberation, good evidence secured around the condition of the animal, and as much information about how the animal was being treated before, in fact, seizure did take place. So it's generally a case then where pretty, you know, blatant, you know, disregard for the welfare of the animal is at stake before seizure does take place. So, so now we're into the second year that the province has been enforcing the Animal Protection Act that was developed over the last number of years. The SPCA are in full support of the amendment, and it's a good amendment, one that our party will support. As you know, the protection of animals against cruelty is important to the Liberal caucus. We've had many members over the time that I've been in the House speak out about animal protection, animal welfare, whether it's farm animals or domestic pets, then we've been concerned that in the past there were many cases where perhaps there was animal cruelty. People were not prosecuted. The fines were very, very low, and as a result, we didn't see perhaps best practices always emerging here in the province, and we have spoken out to ask for strengthening of both sides around animal protection at farms and in the homes. So whether domestic animals or livestock and farm animals, abuse is a disgrace, and whatever measures we can take to ensure this sort of behavior does not happen should be employed. Criminals of this offense should be punished accordingly, and really it's an inexcusable crime, and every now and then, unfortunately in our province, cases become public, and we find out that animal cruelty indeed has taken place, and I guess we will look forward to I guess having other members of the House make comments on the amendment and how it can improve animal protection in this province. With that, Mr. Speaker, I take my place.
The honourable member for Victoria the Lakes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It gives me great pleasure to speak briefly on the Animal Protection Act. Mr. Speaker, the Act has many good points, especially in that it enables fair and timely investigation into complaints, and it does provide the province to recover costs when animals have been seized. But there are two items, I guess, that are of concern to our caucus. And first is that after a judicial review, if it's found in favor of the province, the proceeds less the costs incurred by the province go back to the owner. I guess the concern that we have, it should almost depend on the degree of the failure of care that owner has. And secondly, the details also state that just because seizures have been traditionally low, if a commercial farm is seized, the costs associated will be much higher. Well, Mr. Speaker, I guess depending on what the commercial operation is, many have inspectors that visit on a regular basis, and some of those concerns should be recognized early by those inspectors. So, Mr. Speaker, with those two points, we are willing to let this bill proceed to law amendments, and we'll be further discussing the two concerns as time goes on. Those few words, Mr. Speaker, I take my seat.
The motion is for second reading of Bill number 84, the Animal Protection Act. All those in favor say aye. Aye. All those against say nay. Motion is carried.
Bill number 84, entitled An Act to Amend Chapter 33 of the Acts of 2008, the Animal Protection Act.
Order the bill be referred to the Committee on Law Amendments. The Honourable Government House Leader.
Good morning, Mr. Speaker. Acting Minister of Agriculture, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I move that Bill 85, the Agriculture and Credit Rural Act, be now read for a second time.
Oh, very eloquent.
The Honourable Government House Leader moves that the bill be read for the second time, Bill number 85, Agriculture Rural Credit Act. The Honourable Member for Kings West.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The amendments on this bill are really going to make the process of dealing with the Farm Loan Board, I think, somewhat easier to navigate, and as we all know, that indeed can be very good. And I think the other part here, as opposed to a very long and arduous process, it will make it faster to access farm loans. And this will allow the Nova Scotia agriculture industry to stay competitive. And if those things take place, then while this is a short bill to get up and speak about, I think the essence of the bill is in fact very, very positive. So the proposed changes really are to modernize operations and help farmers and businesses stay competitive. We know during the past couple of decades, agriculture has, in our province, has gone through very, very challenging times. If we look at the broad strokes, we know that the number of census farms have dramatically declined in each 10-year period in which the statistics are available for. The amount of debt that is currently being carried by farmers is massive, and in fact really curtails the work of some farmers to do some transitioning and change into sectors that are doing much better. So farm debt is a considerable problem. Farm labor has been another one of the issues. Costs outstripping the return on investment by the farmer. So we have a whole number of general areas, and farmers count upon the Farm Loan Board to modernize their farms, to transition to other commodities and other sectors within the agricultural industry, sometimes to procure additional farmland. All of these are very, very important areas that the Farm Loan Board can be called upon. So the amendments include updating the duties and powers of the Nova Scotia Farm Loan Board. Other administrative and structural changes to the board will make its operations more efficient. It's important to note that this act is actually responsible for the creation of the Farm Loan Board. One amendment provides the Farm Loan Board with the ability to make loans to pay out existing loans. And this has been done by the board for years, and it clarifies the debt refinancing to farmers who want to take advantage of an affordable rate, allowing them to be more competitive. And again, there are times when, as we all know, farmers go through periods of very, very low price for their commodities. We all know how the BSE crisis hit the cattle industry, and to some extent dairy were impacted as well. And farmers had to go to farm credit, to perhaps a line of credit to keep them going during that particular time. And so there's farm debt in many places, and also it can be just from the Farm Loan Board itself. But we know we've moved into a period of substantially lower interest rates, and so the Farm Loan Board itself can take that significant loan and go through a refinancing and a new plan for the farmer. So this is positive with every small percentage decrease in interest, and also in consolidating some of the loans that farmers have. I think it really makes the Farm Loan Board more responsive to the needs that farmers have. So I see this as a very positive development. Another amendment allows the board staff to sign and authorize necessary documents by proxy. The chair or vice chair isn't available, and this will improve operations, making them more efficient. And again, it's a small measure, but an important measure when we have the chair or vice chair again maybe out of the province and for a week or 2 weeks and so on at a time, and again loans get tied up. So if the loan has gone through the due diligence of all of the background work and the approval processes in place, why not have it signed off and available to go to work? Increasing the maximum number of appointed members and placing a limit on members serving consecutive terms is again a measure that we feel will advance the work of the Farm Loan Board. There's no question that having people come in with perhaps, you know, again, business backgrounds, finance backgrounds, know farm conditions, and what's at work on the farm, I think is an asset to the Farm Loan Board. So rather than have people there that perhaps maybe not as in touch, and to have that new view come forward, because it will state that they can't serve consecutive terms, in fact, is a good measure. The area that we certainly will drill down a little bit on is, you know, what organizations were consulted in bringing this amendment forward, and the level and kind of discussions that went on with the Nova Scotia Federation of Agriculture is an area that as this bill goes forward, we will certainly be asking those questions. But we support the amendments by government and are pleased to move this along to law amendments. And with that, Mr. Speaker, I take my place.
Thank you. The honourable member for Cape Breton North.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It's my honour to speak to this bill this evening. We as a PC caucus are pleased to see that this act will be modernized to make it easier and faster to access farm loans to make sure that our farming industry stays competitive. The one concern we do have is the adjusting the size and the competition should help in improving this time. Authorizing the board to make loans and pay out third-party loans causes us some concern. We need to be cautious that at this point the citizens of Nova Scotia wouldn't be on the hook for a bad loan that was written by a bank or financial institution, and that this process will only be used to speed up the process on the loan. If a bad loan is made by a financial institution, that institution should take some responsibility for this, because if it was originally approving a loan that was bad, then it should be their responsibility in part. We are all for speeding up the process in order to streamline lending, and if it's to write off a loan or to approve another loan on top of that loan, then we're okay with that. If it's to speed up a loan for a time-sensitive situation, just seems like the wording in this clause is a little vague. All in all, it seems to be a good loan, and the support is important to this industry to be continued and clarified. Hopefully we can clarify this above situation. Mr. Speaker, the PC party is in favour of this loan, as is the Federation of Agriculture, and we hope to see this bill go through law amendments. With that, I'll take my place.
The motion is for second reading of Bill number 85, the Agriculture and Rural Credit Act. All those in favour say aye. Aye. All those against say nay. Motion is carried. The clerk.
Bill number 85, an act to amend Chapter 7 of the Revised Statutes 1989, the Agriculture and Rural Credit Act.
Order this bill be referred to the Committee on Law Amendments. I will now recognize the Honourable Government House Leader.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, could you please call Bill number 86, the Fair Automobile Insurance Act?
Bill number 86, the Fair Automobile Insurance Act. The Honourable Minister responsible for the Insurance Act.
Mr. Speaker, in the 2009 NDP election platform, we committed to an independent review of automobile insurance to ensure the lowest, fairest rates. On November 9th, our government announced a consumer-friendly package of auto insurance improvements that fulfills that commitment. The bill that is now before us for second reading, the Fair Automobile Insurance 2011 Act, is an important part, but still only one part, of that consumer-friendly package of improvements. I move that Bill 86 be now read for a second time. Our objective in undertaking this review was to ensure that automobile insurance in Nova Scotia responds to the needs of today's families. It is far too long since auto insurance was last reviewed in this province. There are some elements that are 30 years or more out of date. With this package of improvements, our government is bringing automobile insurance in Nova Scotia into the 21st century. Since becoming Minister responsible for the Insurance Act, I have stated consistently that any reform must strike the right balance between fairness, affordability, and stability. Any reform that does not meet that threefold test will not be adopted. The 2003 changes made by the Conservatives and supported by the Liberals failed that threefold test because fairness was sacrificed for other objectives. That is not the NDP way. We will learn from the mistakes of past governments. Our consumer-friendly package of auto insurance improvements, which includes Bill 86, strikes the right balance between fairness, affordability, and stability. Mr. Speaker, under Nova Scotia law, every automobile used on Nova Scotia's public roadways must be insured. The Insurance Act and the regulations define mandatory benefits that must be included in all standard automobile insurance policies. Automobiles are required to have coverage for third-party liability and medical benefits for people who are injured in automobile collisions. In the event of a collision, insurance benefits are available to help insured parties defray certain costs. Injured parties may claim compensation from the at-fault party for certain losses that occur. Economic awards are available to provide compensation for damages such as medical costs, rehabilitation expenses, funeral expenses, death benefits, loss of income, loss of earning capacity, loss of housekeeping capacity, and past and future medical expenses. Nova Scotia has a competitive automobile insurance system which is delivered by a large network of insurers, brokers, and agents. Automobile insurance rates are regulated by the Utility and Review Board. Insurance companies must seek UARB approval for insurance rates and risk classifications every 2 years for private passenger vehicles and every 3 years for other vehicles. As you can see, Mr. Speaker, auto insurance is a very complex policy area. When considering reform, it is important to get it right. We must avoid panicked responses such as we saw from the Conservatives supported by the Liberals in 2003. We know now that those changes made things worse, not better. Not only was fairness sacrificed by the slashing of compensation, but the rates turned out to be quite a bit higher than necessary. As a result of those Conservative-Liberal changes in 2003, Nova Scotia drivers paid too much, and some Nova Scotians injured in automobile collisions received too little. That was a model, Mr. Speaker, of how not to do auto insurance reform. In contrast, our government developed a review process that is now being held up as a model for other jurisdictions considering auto insurance reform. This is the difference between an NDP government and a Liberal or Conservative government. We took our time to get it right. We also made sure that any proposal would be consumer-friendly and would meet the threefold test of fairness, affordability, and stability. Mr. Speaker, a key component of this package is the extensive consultation that has led up to it. Auto insurance is a complex industry with many players, and we wanted to capture the insight and experience of them all. And I am proud to say that I think we have done exactly that. At our announcement of the improvements on November the 9th, we had support from all of the key stakeholders. And the best part is that we did it while keeping front and center the interests of Nova Scotia drivers and their families. The minor injury reforms introduced last year were the first part of our auto insurance review. Because of the mistakes made by the Conservatives and Liberals in 2003, the problems with the minor injury cap were the most urgent, and so we tackled them first. Those minor injury reforms came into effect on July 1st, 2010, and Mr. Speaker, they are working exactly as expected and intended. After that was done, we established an independent review. Ron Lesperance undertook a robust program of analysis and consultation, and we thank him for his work. We received his interim report at the end of March and his final report at the end of May. Over the summer and fall, the Utility and Review Board did some actuarial work on certain aspects of the Lesperance recommendations. We received their report at the end of September. The Office of the Superintendent of Insurance, which is part of the Department of Finance, also conducted extensive analysis of these reports to determine which reforms should be adopted and how they could best be implemented. The end result of this comprehensive, careful, consumer-oriented process is the package of improvements announced on November the 9th, of which Bill 86, the Fair Automobile Insurance 2011 Act, is a part. Mr. Speaker, the package of reforms is too extensive and in some cases too technical for me to review in detail on second reading. As I've mentioned, not all of the reform package is embodied in Bill 86, since a number of improvements will be implemented by regulation under existing law. And besides, Mr. Speaker, I know that second reading is for approval in principle rather than for a detailed technical examination. I will therefore take only a few minutes to review the highlights of the package of improvements. First, benefits under the no-fault provisions of a driver's own policy, which are referred to in the business as Section B, will be substantially improved. These no-fault benefits are at levels that were barely adequate in the early 1980s when they were last revised and are badly in need of improvement. Second, we are instituting a system by which drivers will be able to deal with their own insurer for property damage, which should allow for quicker and better claim settlement. This system, known in the business as Direct Compensation for Property Damage, or DCPD, is already in place in several other provinces, including New Brunswick. Our legislation mirrors New Brunswick's legislation since the system is working well there. Our draft regulations dealing with fault determination for DCPD also mirror New Brunswick. This promotes harmonization and consistent interpretation of the law in the Atlantic region. The third highlight of the reform package is that insurers will no longer be permitted to penalize a driver who has paid collision damages themselves rather than making a claim under their policy. This has long been an irritant for Nova Scotia drivers, and we are very happy to remove it. Fourth, Mr. Speaker, today's reforms will permit people injured in a collision to get quick and certain access to treatment, with the development of diagnostic and treatment protocols for minor injuries. This system is in force in Alberta and works well there. Our reforms are being deliberately modeled on the Alberta experience. By modeling ourselves on a larger jurisdiction, it is our intention that insurers and courts will be able to take advantage of the policies, practices, and precedents already in place. This should reduce or eliminate uncertainty in how the protocols will be interpreted and applied. Fifth, there are some changes to the insurance relating to car rental companies. The bill limits the liability of rental and leasing companies for damages of up to $1 million. This reform recognizes that rental and leasing companies have little control over drivers, and therefore it is unfair for them to have unlimited liability. There is also a regulation-making power to change which insurance policy responds first, where a car which is rented or leased is involved in a collision. This will be done in such a way as to protect consumers. It is hoped that these changes will, by removing an unnecessary cost for rental companies, put downward pressure on car rental costs in Nova Scotia. Mr. Speaker, the last highlight which I would like to mention from the reform package includes a measure that will provide modest but real financial assistance to small volunteer fire departments in rural Nova Scotia. Mr. Speaker, I'd like to tell a quick story about how this measure came about. A little over a year ago, in August 2010, I attended a drop-in constituency day held by the member for Pictou East in Sutherland's River. Among the people I met there was Joe McDonald, the chief of the Barneys River Volunteer Fire Department. Now, Joe's district includes a portion of Highway 104. He pointed out to me how much of a strain it was, a financial strain on his department to respond to collisions on the highway. The fact is, Mr. Speaker, that those costs should be borne by the insurers of the vehicles involved, but instead were being borne by the ratepayers in his small rural district. The problem is that small volunteer fire departments usually don't have the capacity to chase down insurance claims. And whenever they do, and there is a disagreement with the insurer, the fire departments are often unsure of their rights and don't have the capacity to pursue their claims even if they were. Mr. Speaker, we looked into this issue that Joe raised. We found that fire departments do indeed have the legal right to make an insurance claim, at least under some circumstances. We will take steps to ensure that all volunteer fire departments are aware of their rights under the existing law and that all insurers are aware of their obligations. That really is the best way to solve the issue that Joe McDonald brought to me and the member for Pictou East. But recognizing that small, all-volunteer fire departments often lack the capacity to pursue all possible claims, we will be instituting a levy on insurers of 50 cents per vehicle insured in Nova Scotia. The proceeds of this levy, which are estimated to be $300,000 per year, will be distributed among small volunteer fire departments according to a formula that the departments themselves will decide upon. This will provide modest but real financial support for the volunteer fire departments that are such a critical piece of rural Nova Scotia. I want to acknowledge the member for Pictou East, whose strong commitment to his constituency work is what brought this issue forward. I also want to acknowledge Joe McDonald, the Barneys River Fire Chief, for bringing this issue forward to his MLA and through his MLA to the government. And I especially want to acknowledge, as I'm sure we all do, the commitment of Nova Scotia's volunteer firefighters. Mr. Speaker, I also want to mention one thing that is not included in our proposed legislation, nor in the associated proposed regulations. One of the issues considered by the Independent Auto Insurance Review and evaluated by the Utility and Review Board was whether gender should be disallowed as a factor in calculating premiums. This is a factor that has led to substantial premium differences between young women and young men. The Utility and Review Board reported to us that gender is actuarially sound as a rating factor. In fact, I see you nodding, Mr. Speaker, because I know you have a young man in your household, as do I. Mr. Speaker, the UARB reported to us that gender is actuarially sound as a rating factor. In fact, they said it is more justifiable now than the last time they looked at it. In other words, it continues to be a provable fact that young women cost the auto insurance system less, indeed much less than young men. The UARB also reported to us that removing gender as a rating factor would lead to a substantial increase in premiums for young women, even higher than the decrease in premiums for young men. For all of these reasons, Mr. Speaker, we have concluded that gender should continue to be an allowable rating factor in Nova Scotia. As I mentioned earlier, Mr. Speaker, one of the purposes of the auto insurance review was to ensure that Nova Scotia's auto insurance system is up to date and meeting the needs of today's families. Through these reforms, we brought Nova Scotia's automobile insurance system into the 21st century. We want to make sure that the auto insurance system will never again be allowed to get so badly out of date as the Conservatives and Liberals have allowed to happen. Bill 86 therefore proposes that the system be reviewed at least every 7 years. Before concluding, there is one more person whose contribution to this bill I would like to acknowledge. There is one person in the House whose knowledge of the automobile insurance system surpasses everyone else's in the House. And it's because of his leadership, his knowledge, his commitment to ensuring that the automobile insurance system meets the needs of today's family that this bill is before the House today. I would like to thank him and acknowledge his substantial contribution. Mr. Speaker, I am speaking of the Premier. Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and with that, I move second reading of Bill 86, the Fair Automobile Insurance 2011 Act.
The honourable member for Halifax-Clayton Park.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and it's my pleasure to rise and speak on second reading on Bill 86, which is entitled the Fair Automobile Insurance 2011 Act. And Mr. Speaker, it is certainly interesting to see this back today. I think that we can be pleased that the minister took time to explain this bill. I was disappointed with the first two bills today that there was no real explanation of where the bills came from or why they were needed. At least we got some explanation from this minister, and I do appreciate that, because I think when you come to second reading, it's important to frame the issue and to talk about why it's before us here in the House. And so I was pleased to see that there was a fair bit that was said on second reading by the minister, although I thought it was a little patronizing to suggest that it's too complicated to go into all the details. And, you know, I think that the members of the House would be interested in knowing more detail about what's before us. I think that most of the elements of the bill were covered, but certainly not everything that's in this bill. And although it is a complex set of changes to the Act, I do think members of the House could absorb that and understand it, and would like to know all of the changes that we can be looking for as this bill moves forward. Mr. Speaker, there's a number of things in the bill that we certainly are happy to see. I agree that bills should be reviewed. I believe it's the government's job to do that and make sure that bills don't become out of date. And I think maybe the Minister of Finance and the minister responsible for the Insurance Act should remind himself that it has been over a decade since the Liberals were in government. And although we hope to be there again soon, it has been more than 13 years, and that I think these bills were not out of date at the time that we were in government. And I think it's a little bit disingenuous to lump all opposition parties together in this. Yeah. Mr. Speaker, I was present in 2003 as well when there was a lot of discussion about this, and the minister spoke at that time as a member of the opposition very strongly about the need for public insurance, and very much touting the NDP line that it would be better to have the government set up an entirely separate system to manage the insurance of this province. So he completely rejected the idea that what was working in our province with private brokers and with the insurance companies doing their job was the right way to go. And I heard him myself talk about the benefits of that, why he thought that was the preferred system. Now, the other day, when the minister gave his briefing, he said that was only applicable in a crisis, and that at that time we were in a crisis. And it's interesting that in his opening comments today, he said there was no crisis in 2003, that the government of the day overreacted. Now, either there was a crisis and they reacted, and the minister at the time thought they should have reacted by introducing public insurance, or there wasn't, and that then they overreacted. But I think the minister's take at that point in time as a member of the opposition calling for public insurance shows that very much it was a time of a lot of disturbances in the marketplace, sharp increases in premiums, and a lot of concern for all of us as MLAs. And in fact, that issue became the issue of the 2003 election, even though that wasn't really expected. It just took off and overshadowed all other issues because it was a pocketbook issue, Madam Speaker. It came up, you know, time and time again because people were paying. Isn't that true? They were paying premiums that were much higher, and they didn't understand why, and they were asking all of us to come to terms with it and find a way to alleviate that extreme cost that was coming from it. Now, that being said, Madam Speaker, I do believe that these changes are needed, and I do believe that the soft tissue definition was wrong that was brought in that time in 2003. It was misinterpreted, I believe, in regulation, not in the bill that was passed here in the House. The bill that was passed, I think, would have been a reasonable approach. But the regulations that were written behind closed doors and with no input from the members of this House, you know, with only the government members having any say in them, those went beyond what a definition of a minor injury was. And they really manipulated and circumvented the intent of this House. And that, to me, was you know, quite a rude awakening as a new member of the legislature at that time. That the government members could take what was the intent of members here, what was spoken about on the floor of the legislature, and go behind closed doors and write their own definitions, you know, write their own interpretations, which then become the regulations that govern an industry. That was wrong. And certainly in the ensuing years, there have been many people that have been caught in this in-between time when the payouts for what were called minor injuries were in fact very low. And some of those people have enduring pain, enduring problems and difficulty. And I know some of them in my riding. I've talked to them, and I think it is a travesty that they've been left out in that period of time. So I was pleased to see the amounts increased earlier for the cap that is in place on minor injuries and soft tissue injuries. I think that was long overdue. And I know that, again, as has been pointed out, the mandatory no-fault benefits that are included in this Act had been left unchanged for many years. It was said that some of them are 30 years old. And that certainly is necessary to be changed as well, Madam Speaker. And again, because we all have the opportunity to speak and meet many people in our ridings and in the province, we know that the kind of payments that were available for those benefits were really inadequate. And just to go over a few of them, you can see, I guess they've all been doubled or a little bit more than doubled. I see funeral expenses have gone from $1,000 to $2,500. So, I mean, that certainly is a necessary change. And they've also increased the amount for loss of income. It's gone from $140 a week to $250 a week. I mean, even that is modest. It really is, to try and maintain your home if you've been injured and you're living in pain or trying to get well again. So that's still not much money if you can't go to work. So I'm glad to see there are changes. This will be a benefit to anybody who's involved in an accident now and in the future here in Nova Scotia. So by all means, we are looking forward to those changes coming into effect. Some of the changes, I think, again, were mentioned by the minister. For example, the support for volunteer fire departments. And I know some of our members that live in rural areas or have volunteer fire departments will see this impact very directly. It's not fair to ask those small departments to pick up the cost of going to the scene of an accident and the costs involved in helping people at that time, when it should be returned to them from the insurance companies. And it wasn't an issue, I was told in our briefing, it was was not an issue in HRM because the cities and the bigger towns that have full-time fire departments are able to use their own legal resources to make sure they get the money back. So they weren't out of pocket, but areas like any of the rural areas, but we talked about Pictou East, were affected, and those volunteer fire departments were being harmed, and their ability then to do other work is harmed because their resources are gone. So I'm glad to see that. It will mean 50 cents per vehicle, but I think Nova Scotians would support that. It's, you know, collectively it will give a pool of money that will help in those instances. So I think that that's a small price to pay. But, Madam Speaker, as we come to cost, I think that's the crux of the matter right now. There are a lot of changes on the table, some coming in this April coming, 2012, and another group of changes coming in 2013 at the start of that fiscal year. And they are complicated in that there's a lot of balls in the air at one time, if I can put it that way. A lot of different changes that are going to have an impact on the cost of insurance. It's going to certainly have an impact on the cost to the underwriters and the brokers and the people writing your policy. So what we really want to see is how is this going to transcend into our premiums as individuals and for the people we represent. Are we going to see cost pressures? Are they going to be, you know, pushed upward? Hopefully not too severely. In fact, hopefully not at all. And maybe we got a very rosy briefing from the department, but I appreciated the briefing. The briefing was that we expect not to see much increase in the premiums. And if I believe them, which I hope they are right, that will be very good because we'll see an improvement in the benefits for consumers, an improvement for the people that we represent in the province who have actually been at a disadvantage compared to other provinces in Canada because we didn't have the same benefits that you would get if you were injured in even our neighboring provinces. And so that was important that they be treated fairly. I agree with that. But there will be cost pressures. And I am concerned about that, and I think the devil is going to be in the details of how all of these different changes unfold and how we see Nova Scotia's rates really respond. Now, in the meantime, we have the URB that's been put in charge of this. And they look at insurance rates, and any company that wants to increase their premiums has to go before the URB. I think they go annually or on a regular schedule anyway to present what their financial situation is like and what they want to do with their premiums, if they want to have increases and so on. If that's coming, we're going to then be putting our trust in the URB to be able to. So the Utility and Review Board will be the body that will be administering this. And I'm a little bit concerned, maybe more than a little bit concerned, that they will have the ability to control those rates because it's arm's length from government, Madam Speaker, and you and I know that whenever we put an element like this in the hands of the Utility and Review Board, we have divorced it from government. It becomes arm's length, and when there are questions here on the floor of the House, I know what the answer is. That's not our business, that's the URB's business. The Utility and Review Board have to do their work unimpeded by government, unimpeded by politics. But the reality of the day is these kind of cost pressures, whether it be power rates, whether it be our insurance rates, those kind of cost pressures that are hitting people we represent will become political issues. You know, if they're escalating and if there's pressure on families. And so it's very difficult for me to sit back and feel comfortable that the URB is going to be in charge solely in handling these rates, because I haven't been satisfied with the way that we've treated Nova Scotia Power and their applications for increases. They've been getting exorbitant increases every year, and they're given a huge rate of return that they feel entitled to, that's built into their arrangement with government and I guess with the URB. And so those things have to change, and I want to know and have some confidence that when things are not working well and when Nova Scotian families are being impacted, that the government has the power to step in. I mean, clearly, insurance is a regulated industry because we have this act before us. This act is laying out the parameters under which the insurance business and the insurance industry operates. And I am pleased to see that there's been some consultation in this bill. I see that both the Insurance Bureau of Canada, which is more of a policy and a higher level organization, as well as the insurance brokers who are in every one of our ridings. We have insurance brokers. Both of those organizations have supported the bill, again with some reservation about how it's going to be implemented, exactly how it's going to unfold, but they like the individual elements from what I can gather. So that's a positive. But I do point out that as a member of the Liberal caucus, our concern is going to be the affordability factor. The minister talked about that as one of the elements that has guided him. And if in fact that is one of the key ones, then I'm sure he will also be very concerned. Now let us hope that the changes the minister brought in don't create a crisis, and let us hope that we don't go back to the discussion about public insurance in Nova Scotia. For a small province with less than 1 million people, I think it would be an enormous boondoggle to go that way and to set up something of that nature. And I don't think this is going to cause any huge problem. But if in fact we are put in a position where prices were to rise quickly for insurance premiums, that would be a crisis, because that's what we faced in 2003. And there were huge pressures on individuals, many of whom, some couldn't get any insurance because they weren't they didn't have good driving records, or they had difficulties, and the cost for them to be insured became so enormous they couldn't even afford their insurance. And I mean, things like that were happening in 2003. That was a really difficult time when people depend on driving for their work, in order to get to work, in order to be fully engaged in the economy. So we knew that was unacceptable, that we had to find a way to make it affordable for people to drive. As I said, some of the changes that were mentioned, the increase in those mandatory no-fault benefits, which are things like loss of income, and I think there are death benefits there as well, medical and rehab expenses, and even principal unpaid housekeeper, where a person is injured, how much money will they get? And it's different for loss of income is from a primary income earner to somebody who is not earning income, but is certainly providing many services at home. Madam Speaker, you'll remember that we spoke just on the weekend about how many years we all spent at home. I guess that put us in the category of the principal unpaid housekeeper. But I think there's nothing wrong with that. I don't particularly like that term, do you? I think maybe I'd ask the government to look at changing that definition, because we all agree, members of the government and of opposition, the women members agree that that's not a very good way to describe the very important work that whatever spouse is home is doing, the spouse that's staying home doing important work. That actually takes me to the issue of gender, and I was glad that the minister mentioned it at the end of his discussion, because that was a recommendation from the review that was done. The consultant's review talked about their evidence that young, or not even young, it's inexperienced women drivers were far less risky than inexperienced male drivers. And we know there's been a big differential in the cost of insuring boys and girls. In my own family, many of us are talking about insuring our children. But I think that we have to look at what is actuarially justified. And it was very clear that this is based on risk, and the risk is measured by actual claims. And there's no question that girls were a better risk, or inexperienced women drivers are a better risk. And therefore, I think it's important that we honor that, because often when we're passing legislation and looking at things, we may not consider what is fair in that instance. And one thing I would love to see the government do in future, and perhaps there is some move afoot to begin to do this, I know that there is a call for it, and that is that all legislation that passes the House should go through a gender lens. And that means you look at what is the impact of this legislation on men and on women. And I think that's really important that we do it. Other legislatures have begun to do it. It's become something that I heard only yesterday when Sheila Fraser got her honorary degree from Mount St. Vincent University. It was said that Sheila Fraser was the first Auditor General in Canada to begin to look at gender as part of her performance audits, and integrate the gender analysis into her performance audits. And I'm interested to know more about that, because I don't know of it, and it was the first I had heard. And I thought that was another important thing. But gender does play a role sometimes, and in the interest of trying to be fair to all, we might harm, women in this instance if we were to abandon the actuarially justified rates. So I'm glad to see that will be, continued in terms of what the evidence shows. Madam Speaker, I don't know that the minister mentioned one of the features, and that was the full tort option. I'm not sure that I heard that in his opening comments. He covered an awful lot of the different features that are in this bill, but there is something very unique that is being proposed, and it's called an optional full tort product for minor injuries. And that would be an option that is being proposed for drivers. It won't come into play, I don't think, until the second step or second year of this implementation, but it is to give consumers or the driving public a choice to pay a higher premium in order to basically not be involved in the cap that's on pain and suffering for minor injuries. So it takes you out of that category entirely. If you pay a higher premium, you will now be able to go with what they call the full tort option. And I'm not a lawyer by training, but or even by hobby or any other way. But is there another way to become a lawyer? But anyway.
Online.
Anyway, it'd be enough to say I'm not a lawyer, but my concern is the cost of this.
Order, please. The honourable member has the floor.
I feel like one. No, Madam Speaker, finance is my area of greater expertise. And my concern again here is the cost of this and also the implications to lawyers themselves. We haven't heard what the legal community feels about this entire basket of changes that are being brought up by the Minister of Finance. We haven't heard whether they think this is good or bad. And those of you who were at law amendments in 2003 will remember that we heard from a good number of lawyers and that they were very alarmed at that point in time and spoke very loudly, you know, first and foremost on behalf of their clients who they felt would be left without recourse. And I've spoken earlier about many of those people who were, because they simply didn't have with the cap in place, they weren't able to have a lawyer or to seek further benefits or redress from their injuries. So that was a problem. But I'd like to know where they stand today on this basket of changes. And I'm a little worried when the Minister of Finance says that the biggest supporter of this and the biggest expert in their entire government side of the House is the Premier himself, who was an injuries lawyer, who did exactly that sort of work. He worked with personal injury and sought compensation for people in those circumstances. Now, those were the people who were doing his work were harmed by the changes in 2003, if we can believe what they told us in large numbers at law amendments. So I wonder exactly what these changes are going to mean again for the legal community and those that are still engaged in that work. And I'm wondering what the impact will be of this full tort option. It's very likely that it'll be too expensive for many people to afford. And probably it won't be taken up in very many great numbers. But again, on the finance side of things, Madam Speaker, where I do have background and knowledge, I would be interested to see what the impact's going to be there, what the premiums will be, and whether or not we're creating a two-tier system that offers so much better benefits to those who can afford the expensive premiums, as opposed to those who are going to be kept under the cap of $7,500, which I think now is $7,600 for soft tissue injury, because it's on an index, a cost price indexing, so it will go up a little bit every year with inflation. But I just caution about having a two-tier system, which I think would not be the intent of an NDP government, certainly to create something for the rich, something else for the poor. I don't think that would be in line with your philosophy, and something to consider about, you know, where this bill will take us in the future. Madam Speaker, my main concerns really are the affordability and what these changes are going to do to our premiums. So I think that this calls for just watch, all of us to watch it carefully, to be alert to any changes and to be flexible enough to intervene before it becomes too severe. And so it's great to have a 7-year review of this, but given that these are quite major changes to come in the next 2 years, I would hope that the government will be watching it very closely to see the impacts on the costs, and again, trying to get a little bit more control over the URB in terms of leaving all of this in their hands really does leave Nova Scotians I think, open to perhaps, you know, very, very difficult times ahead, because the URB simply hasn't kept control over power rates, and, you know, really, who knows what's going to happen when they are again in charge of these kind of changes, which are going to create pressure in the auto insurance area. Madam Speaker, there was only one further issue that I'd like to perhaps raise today. I wasn't sure why in the very opening clauses of the Act it calls for a clause change that will permit more than one Deputy Superintendent of Insurance to be appointed. And again, I don't know why we would feel the necessity of having more than one Deputy Superintendent of Insurance. You know, perhaps this is a small matter. Maybe it's so that if one's away on vacation, the other one can act. I'm not sure, but I would like to know why that is. Maybe that's something the minister can simply answer. It probably has a simple answer, but I would like to know. And, you know, I hope it's not something about creating a bigger bureaucracy around this, because we have a fairly small province. Again, I don't need to remind the members that we need to control the growth in bureaucracy as well, and not to have needless bureaucracy. And I know we have a very good deputy superintendent right now. I think, well, we have a good superintendent of insurance, I think is what we have. But we don't want a bigger bureaucracy, so maybe the minister could talk about what the current structure is and how many we need to have, and why we would suggest that we need more. That said, I'm interested in law amendments, the next stage of this when we finish second reading, because again, we heard from so many people when the changes to the Insurance Act went through in 2003. There are a lot of people impacted by this, people who've been injured, people who represent those that are injured. We know we'll hear from the legal profession and from the insurance brokers themselves, and I'm sure others in the industry. So I think that with all of these changes coming forward, it'll be important to listen to what those who are most knowledgeable about it have to say. And with that, I will certainly, as I say, turn the floor over to others who have comments to make on this bill, and I look forward to hearing their comments and those that we will hear at law amendments. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
I now recognize the honourable member for Inverness.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. And from listening to the minister's remarks tonight, I would almost sense that he's still a bit sensitive about his days in opposition. And with just 1 or 2 short years left before the end of this government's mandate, I would hope that he would mature and focus more on what his government is doing rather than this aimless sparring that he chooses to do. I think Nova Scotians out there know of the promises that were broken by this government from their election campaign, and I know that they often say that their way is the NDP way, and it's different from everybody else, and they like to claim this moral high ground. But, you know, Madam Speaker, I think Nova Scotians see through that. And it's a very risky way to go about one's business in this legislature, and we can all do with humility. There was some comments that I do take exception to, and one was that Nova Scotians paid too much and those injured received too little. But in fact, if we focus on the first part, Nova Scotians were paying too much. That was the very reason for the changes that were made back in 2003, and that was the reason that the cap was instituted. And Nova Scotians have seen meaningful decreases in their premiums. And a quick review over the last number of years, if Nova Scotians were to do it, if they looked at their premiums, they would note that they have decreased. The injured received too little. Well, I think it's always important to highlight that the cap only applies to injuries that are minor and those that will heal. And that is in the eyes of qualified physicians. And I think that's an important point to be made, Madam Speaker. So I think, and it needs to be made here tonight, because to suggest that those changes were not in the interests of Nova Scotian consumers is unfair. So if we look at some of the changes that are brought in with this piece of legislation, you know, we look at the cap itself, and this government spoke against the cap while in opposition, but we see that they chose to keep it, which further affirms that the decision to have a cap in the first place made sense. and saved cents for Nova Scotians who were paying for their auto premiums, paying for their auto insurance. So the cap was maintained. It was increased modestly, and we supported that, Madam Speaker. And so I think suffice it to say the cap was a good decision back in 2003 because this government, while they complain about what was done in the past, have chosen to keep it. If it ain't broke, don't fix it. And it's obvious that the government has chosen not to make changes with that. There are some minor points here. There's, I know the minister didn't mention his remarks, but I think there are one of the clauses to allow more than one deputy superintendent of insurance, and I presume that this is for practical reasons. If one person is not available or for some reason to make a decision at a point in time, then it would make sense. We support that, to have another person available to do that. The MLA for Pictou East made a recommendation. It's nice to see the Minister of Finance listens to some of the MLAs in the legislature. And we, of course, support our volunteer fire departments. I was recently at a dinner in Port Hood where they celebrated 50 years of serving their community. And we are happy that the government is working with them to help them. It's very important because fire departments, as we know, they have the ability and they can claim costs that they incur when responding to motor vehicle accidents. And that's right as per the standard automobile policy. So that's something that already exists, Madam Speaker. And so it's important for government to be assisting those volunteer fire departments to ensure that they are able to make those claims. Because as we know, they have to do a lot of fundraising to maintain their operations, and some benefit from area rates. But those volunteers put their heart and souls into what they do, and they're certainly valued parts of our Nova Scotian communities. We hear that there's going to be a formula that's decided upon by the volunteer fire departments. We think that it's good to have volunteer fire departments involved in that decision making. I must make the comment, though, Madam Speaker, that there was a first responders fund that was reduced by 90% by this government. And that was instituted by the previous Progressive Conservative government to help these volunteer fire departments with the costs of their purchasing equipment, their buildings, capital investments that they make. And we know that volunteer fire departments appreciated that program. And I think it needs to be put on the record here tonight that that was something that this NDP government took away from our volunteer firefighters in this province. And it's important for people to know that. And that's fact. It was taken away. It was reduced by 90%. So, let's see, I probably have some other items to mention here. I do want to say something positive, something from the Nova Scotia College of Chiropractors. And he mentioned, I'm going to quote him here, this is Dr. Ward McDonald, said, "We know from our experience and research into the treatment of whiplash that more timely care leads to better outcomes and recoveries for patients." And Madam Speaker, this makes sense. It's important for people not to have any delays if they require treatment. The sooner they can be treated, the sooner they can be helped to recover from any injuries. And that saves money, which in turn makes rates more affordable for Nova Scotians. So I did want to mention that.
Order, please. Would the honourable member please table the